So it's my great pleasure to introduce Kevin Collins-Thompson. Kevin is an associate professor in the Information and Computer Science Department at the University of Michigan. He's also director of the Online Master of Applied Data Science program. I first met Kevin at an information retrieval conference in Dublin about 10 years ago. I was speaking with a friend of mine, Jamie Callan, who is Kevin's advisor at Carnegie Mellon. I told Jamie about my work as a consultant for the Educational Testing Service, and he said, "You have to meet my student." And he introduced us. Kevin's work is especially noted for the interdisciplinary aspects. He has worked with people in cognitive psychology, computer science, and education. I worked with him myself on a project to use a computer for vocabulary assessment. It was a project that created strong emotions for me. I compared scores from students in suburban Pittsburgh with those in urban Atlanta. And the second set of scores was dramatically worse than the first set. It drove home to me just how much of a gap there is between the two communities. Kevin has worked on using information retrieval for education, for student assessment of vocabulary, and using the computer to assess reading level of material in order to facilitate personalized education. I'm looking forward to his talk.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you very much for the invitation, and especially thank you, Bob, for reaching out. It's a delight to see you again. As Bob mentioned, he and I have worked closely together on some very interesting educational technology related work, and this is a field that I've been working in for, well, probably more than 20 years. And so the title of my talk may seem a little grandiose, but you know, I will quickly narrow it down. It's obviously a very large field with lots of both possibilities on the computational side and the learning side. Yeah, are we okay for sound?
Not sure yet.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, the title of my talk is rather broad, but it does reflect kind of the scope of sort of a diverse set of things that I've worked on over the past 20 years. I would say the broadest, highest level summary of my work is connecting people with information optimally, especially for learning and to help them discover. So it's been my pleasure to work with Bob on part of that landscape. And today I would like to kind of summarize some of my work in that area with my collaborators, and I'd sort of share what I've learned over the course of exploring a particular part of the landscape, what we've learned together in our studies, and I'll describe how I focused in a particular area of computational approaches to learning. I've been very fortunate to work with a fantastic set of collaborators, and the work I'll mention today involves a number of people across multiple institutions. So I'm going to focus today on two areas that I view as particularly challenging and relevant, even with the advent of GPT models, large language models, and there's still there's a lot that those are promising tools for, but there are still also some fundamental challenges that need to be solved on the computational side to enable us to really unlock the potential of technology for learning. And so I'm going to talk today about two particular challenges. The first one is, how can we create rich representations of digital content, extract new kinds of metadata in order to identify the best materials for learning. And you'll see that once we have metadata attached to content, you can sort of automatically start gathering models of users who interact with that content. So I'll start with a simple example of as Bob mentioned, I've worked in reading difficulty model prediction. And I'll talk a bit more about just briefly about some current work we're doing to extract learning moments in lectures. And then the second area involves basically making current reinforcement learning, machine learning algorithms aware of human cognitive properties and goals. So basically, if you think about a search engine, for example, a typical search engine ranking algorithm is unaware of, someone's learning goals. Longer term, it's unaware of sort of the cognitive strengths and weaknesses that people bring to technology. And so another area that I think is really exciting is making AI algorithms aware of human capabilities and goals. So that turns out to lead to some interesting optimization problems, which need approximate solutions, and I'll explain kind of a bit more about that later. I also just want to kind of highlight some of the lessons we've learned doing studies across years and different modalities. So for those of you who leave my talk in the first 5 minutes, maybe you'll stay with these lessons that I think are super important. One is that we've, the typical design of a study is you have a pre-test where you test, somebody, you have a survey before the session. There's a session where they interact with materials or, do some learning activity, and then you test them afterwards with a post-test and a survey and so forth. And the vast majority of studies in psychology and education and often, look at immediate learning gains of whether this treatment was effective for learning compared to a control, for example, in part because of the difficulty and expense of doing trying to bring people back for a delayed post-test a week or a month later. A lot of studies surprisingly don't do that delayed post-test, and it turns out we have seen multiple cases now where we would not have detected certain effects if we had not focused beyond just immediate learning. We're really actually interested in long-term retention. How do people remember things over time? And then tied to that, also looking beyond immediate learning gains as the main success measure, we've learned that we've had situations where we've tried two different algorithms. They both lead to the same immediate short-term learning gains, but one of them saves students 50% of the time. They can do things 50% faster, which means they have the other half of the time to presumably spend learning more things. So there are other metrics besides just learning gains and time saved, whether something increases somebody's curiosity. So we've learned to look beyond some of the easy metrics and try to focus on having a broad view of what's happening in terms of the outcomes. And a couple of the domains that we have found we've started with. So we all know measuring learning is really difficult, especially at high level learning. And as Bob mentioned, I've worked a long time in vocabulary learning. And vocabulary learning has been an ideal domain to kind of start looking at these algorithmic questions and trying to connect people with the right content. And also web and educational search. There's a sort of a newer area of research called search as learning that recognizes that search engines are one of the primary ways people search for information for learning. And there's a lot that we could be doing to create search engines that help people learn. And that's one of the things I work on as well. So I'm just going to give a very quick summary of some what I mean by rich representation. And I'm going to start off with something that's super simple, but I'll show that even a simple addition of reading difficulty metadata and topic metadata can have really interesting implications and enable lots of interesting things. And also, so I have worked in some of my earlier work when I was still a grad student, developed models of reading difficulty that were that worked very well for non-traditional documents, so things that were not just vanilla text pages, but short documents, noisy documents, web pages, surveys, things like that. So I'm not going to talk about the details of those statistical models here, but the first kind of metadata that I played with was taking a web page, for example, and using the statistical method, which the statistical method I developed creates a posterior distribution of reading levels. In this case, it's US grade levels 1 to 12. So you can attach that distribution to each web page, and I did an experiment. So I before I was at Michigan, I worked at Microsoft Research. And I was able to do things like, tag every page in the search engine index with reading level information and see what kinds of queries and implications that had. So the first work that we did was to tag pages with this posterior distribution over reading level. And that by itself is pretty useful. You can start filtering, individual pages by level for whatever application. You can see how the web page, if it's something that gets updated, how that changes over time. But then once you have this metadata for individual web pages, you can then aggregate it for all the pages on a site, and you can come up with a profile of how the reading level changes across the site. And it becomes even more powerful when you combine it with topic information. So in addition to the reading level classifier, we had a topic classifier. And so now we had sort of two complementary sets of metadata, the reading level and the topic. And with those two types of metadata, we were able to actually characterize fairly well. We were able to distinguish, expert sites in finance or law or medicine from non-expert sites. So when we published a paper about that in Wisdom 10 years ago. So, and then the third level is once you have these aggregated metadata for sites, people visit sites and they visit pages and do searches. So you can then aggregate that traffic through the search engine, for example, and you can use it to create user profiles. So now you not only have expertise profiles of websites, you can now create expertise profiles of users. You can see that this user is is a scientific expert in a particular area, most likely based on what they click on when they search. You can look at when the reading level of what they're searching for changes. When they start searching for something that's, you can tell based on their profile that suddenly they're searching for something that's a lot more difficult than they're normally used to searching for, and that typically, for example, if somebody comes across a new medication or a medical thing they're looking up, or they're preparing for a job interview. So there are a lot of interesting things that you can gather just from a simple addition of metadata. And here's another fun example. I'm very proud that we were able to publish something from the Matrix Reloaded in the Journal of the American Statistical Association. You can compute, instead of just global readability for a page or a large text, you can compute local readability with a sliding window. And so using the statistical methods for readability I developed, we took the script of the Matrix Reloaded and ran it through the grade levels local readability analysis. And with this new representation, you can look at some interesting events. So it turns out that every time the reading level falls to the lowest possible level is when Keanu Reeves enters the scene. And then there's an interesting scene in the middle, if you remember the movie, where it's entirely in French. And then there's this famous architect speech at the end, which is long and complicated. So the point of this is just to show that with some simple additional learning related metadata, you can suddenly do a lot in terms of looking at existing content in a new way. And so we applied this new metadata to the problem of personalizing web search by reading level. And my motivation for this project was I came home from work one day, and my daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, was in tears. And I said, well, what's wrong? And she said, well, I was trying to do a project on sea urchins. and everything I was searching for on the web was too difficult. She was very frustrated. So that's pretty good motivation, I would say. And so anyway, we with these reading level features, we found some very interesting things about. We found that we were able to increase the quality of the ranking for scientific topics, for example. We also found some interesting phenomena where there are interesting differences where a search result looked like it was going to be easy, and when you clicked on it, it actually turned out to be much more difficult. We could actually see people abandoning the page, and we actually that turned out to be a useful signal for the ranker to incorporate in improving the rankings. So this personalizing web search by reading level is an example of how a lot of the work that I've done is trying to figure out like what's a better representation for the content that B will enable better connecting of people to the right information. So yeah, I did some fun experiments when you can label every page in a web index, many billions of pages web index with reading level metadata and topic data. You can run some interesting queries. So you can say, well, okay, I can search for quantum theory and get the normal results. But then I can say, okay, show me all of the results for quantum theory that are at the very low level of difficulty. So it turns out that quantum theory is a cocktail. I guess it's a PlayStation. So you can start adjusting these knobs and sort of to navigate around. You can say, okay, I want low difficulty quantum theory pages, but I want to make sure they're still focused on science. So then you start getting blogs about, quantum theory. So you can do all sorts of things. So Cinderella was apparently an interactive geometry tool. You can see, it's fun to sort of be able to navigate in this new sort of space of topic and reading level. And then, so currently what we're working on is extending this idea, far beyond just readability to extract key moments from educational video. And we've also been discovering that these large language models like GPT-3 and GPT-4, well, we've been working with GPT-3 so far. They apparently do have a reasonable amount of domain-specific knowledge about STEM fields, for example, like what the typical curriculum is in a STEM field. And so we're working on using large language models to do domain-specific content difficulty, so chemistry-specific reading difficulty and so forth. We're also using large language models to extract key moments from educational video. Is the instructor defining a new concept? Are they referring to something, in the past or future? Are there critical examples that they cite, and so forth? So there's a huge amount of promise in this area. I think it'll be revolutionizing the way that we can represent what's being said in class, what's being shown in class. And so that's, yeah, I think that's super exciting. Yeah, in fact, so here's an example from chemistry. We're analyzing chemistry lecture videos, which are particularly challenging given the nature of some of the slides and things. But we're combining the large language models with optical character recognition on the slides, speech recognition on the audio. And so once you can do that, again, it's a very rich representation of what's happening and being said in class. And you can compare, you can do lots of that. You can search it in interesting ways. You can compare what's being said in class with what's being given as assignments, and look at the coverage of topics and so forth. So lots of interesting promise there. I'm happy to take questions. I realize that there's a lot of material here. How did you solve the Searson research problem with your daughter? Essentially, I was able to create a custom version of the search engine that was accessible from within the company, and and using the kinds of queries that I showed you, was able to find material that way. And I guess I'm not sure if I can say if it was eventually deployed or not, but okay.
Go ahead.
Kevin, have you done any stuff with text simplification in the context with STEM vocabulary?
We are working on that right now. We are working on part of what we're working on is extracting summaries of what's being said in class, and also summaries of we have recorded office hours. We can produce some summaries of those, and that is something we are working on. Although the text summarization and simplification aspect isn't, I wouldn't say it's the core part of our research. We're not developing new methods for that at the moment, but it's part of this view of creating these rich representations of what's being said in class, for example.
I'm thinking especially like with when I was looking at things, the medical morphology and breaking things down to help the students pick the words apart to figure out what the meaning is.
Mm-hmm. So part of I don't have a slide for this, but part of what we're working on, we have is a combined search engine and study guide. So you may have seen this. There are some apps, like for example, to teach languages this is not a new idea, but the idea is by searching for a term, or concept or something, you can also trigger the system to find relevant material. Where is this particular concept discussed? What's the origin of this concept? And that is exactly the kind of thing that what you're talking about would be. That's in part would address what you're talking about, because we are very interested in how people learn technical vocabulary. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the second part I'm going to briefly go over is, I talked about rich representations, but then with those representations, there's a need to make machine learning algorithms aware of how humans see information, right? So what do I mean by that? If you think about a search engine, search engines are optimized for generic relevance. They're given lots of training data with sort of query URL pairs where judges say, yes, this is highly relevant to this query or not. But there's nothing in there that the engine knows about when it comes to reading level was one example, simple example of something about the content that would be relevant, to the cognitive abilities of the user, but was never really present in, search ranking algorithms, for example. So the goal is that we want to optimize have these machine learning algorithms. We want to take obviously a lot of research from cognitive science and psychology about how people learn and are motivated and so forth. We want to be able to exploit all of that great work in cognitive science and psychology. We want to take those models and stick them into the middle of machine learning algorithms, so the algorithms become aware in some sense, usually a simplified sense, but a better than nothing sense of how the user, what's the information look like through the cognitive lens of the user. So so there's a line of research where I've been working on search engines that help people learn, and we define a representation of what the user knows, what they'd like to know, but also very simple cognitive models of how new information might help them, advance their knowledge state from where they are to where they'd like to be. Essentially, we're trying to find, what is optimal teaching material. And so we take a typical search system and we modify it to insert a cognitive model into the algorithm that the search system uses to produce a ranking. And you can think about all sorts of aspects of our cognition that could be relevant to this kind of scenario. how difficult, I already showed you one about how difficult content is, how much effort it takes to process. If you're trying to learn something that involves vocabulary, there's a lot known about optimal vocabulary learning on the human side, how to scaffold examples and so forth, and also memory, spaced repetition. That's potentially relevant. Topic coverage goals, which I'll show you in a minute, and other kinds of cognitive challenges like dyslexia, for example. It'd be great to have a search system that understood the cognitive challenges that a user had and adapt the results accordingly. So examples of models that we look at are things like conceptual capacity, and like how we model, modeling information overload. Models like ACT-R, which is a cognitive model that incorporates models of memory, among other things. How recently did you see the last example of a concept? How often? So the other interesting thing about this paradigm is that it allows us to perform task-based adjudication of different learning models. So what I mean by that is, if there are two different models from cognitive psychology that are kind of, we want to see if we could actually try each, if we implement each of those models in this retrieval task to see the effect that it has on someone's learning, and that might give some evidence, towards which of these models is sort of closer to what people actually, how people actually learn. So there are some contributions in theory you could make to cognitive psychology by allowing the adjudication of these models. So one theme that has run through our work. So you might ask, well, how do you optimize? What do you mean by optimization, and how do you optimize a set of results for someone's learning goals? Well, what I'm going to do is just walk through a very simple initial example that involves trying to cover different aspects of a single topic as a starting point. So this is something that in our search research we called intrinsic diversity. And so an example might be, you're interested in snow leopards and you want to find out where they live and their lifespan. Maybe you're doing a project involving learning about them. So this, if you think about the set of 10 search results that you want to show somebody, this is, there's a set level optimization problem here. You want to get results that are relevant, but you also don't want results that are all just about, snow leopards, where they live. You want to get a diverse set of things across the different aspects of this single topic or intent. If you didn't have that, people would be doing multiple searches to find different aspects. And ideally, what you want is to try to predict which aspects they might want to explore, and then pick the best document from each of the aspects and just sort of pull it into their current results. And so this is what we did in our SIG-IR 2013 paper. And I'm starting with this example because the kinds of education examples that I'll be talking about are all currently different kinds of set level optimizations. And so this particular optimization problem is trying to optimize diversity of topic coverage. But as I'll show you in the example after this, in the vocabulary learning example, we're trying to optimize coverage of vocabulary that's to be learned. So normally optimizing a set of things can be a large set of things. It can be computationally infeasible. You can't try every possible combination of the top 100 web pages. So we make use of something called submodular optimization. So we have this objective function that tells us what a good set is, and it turns out that objective function, if we pick the right objective, we can show that objective function is what's called submodular, which is sort of a diminishing returns property of the function. And it turns out that submodular functions, you can have very effective approximate solutions, greedy solutions. I'll explain more about what that means in a minute. But so we've been looking at a line of different objectives that are submodular, and there's fancier versions of those called adaptive submodular. But the bottom line is that they're all trying to capture usually set level properties of what's in front of the user, and some of them, like in the adaptive case, can use the history of what somebody's already seen or interacted with. So anyway, this is the intrinsic diversity case to start with, and so we want to be able to show something like this. We want to be able to show this is like each of these things on the right is an different aspect of this artist, and then we want to show for each aspect the best, the top ranked web page for that query. So that's the optimization problem. How do we do that? If we want to have this page be high quality, there are 4 criteria that you could say it has to satisfy. These documents, there's an original query up here about Kelly Clarkson. So those documents should be relevant to the main query. They should be relevant, we want to show the best results for these individual aspects on the right. We want the aspects to be related to the original query, but we also want the aspects to be diverse. And so this is an example of, and I'll show you in a minute how this is related to learning, but you can take these 4 conditions and encode them into an objective function that looks a bit like this. And so the problem, the DIs here are documents, and the QIs are the corresponding queries that find those documents. And so if we break this down, this objective function, which is trying to find a good, that's a measure of how good this page is. The fact that these documents are relevant, these DIs, the documents are relevant to the original query at the top of the page is important. It's also important for a document to be relevant to its corresponding aspect on the left. And then there's a diversity aspect. So I won't go into the details here, but this basically says, okay, we're going to pick these QI aspects to be dissimilar from each other. And if you do the analysis, it turns out that in this formulation, this function, this objective function, is submodular. It has a diminishing returns property. And what it means is that if you have a set of candidates, you don't have to try every possible combination. You can select individual, document query pairs, compute the objective function, and then greedily pick the item that has the highest score, and that becomes the thing at the top rank. And then you can repeat the process. You can say, okay, what object, what query document pair has the next best value of this objective function? And that becomes the second rank. So it's a greedy process where each step you take the best remaining thing. And because it's submodular, that comes with certain theoretical guarantees that say that that the web page you put together with this greedy algorithm can be has certain guarantees about it can be no worse than a certain percentage of the optimal. So that's the great value of having a submodular objective. And I won't go into the details here. You can look at the paper, but the algorithm itself is very simple on how to select these. This is the greedy algorithm that created this web page of query document pairs. And so the old search results look like this, and then when you apply this algorithm to select the documents and the queries, so this would be the queries, the QIs over here, and the DIs over here, you get a very nice intrinsically diverse set of results. So the question is, this is all great and useful for exploring, but what does this help learning at all? And so this algorithm we published at SIGGRAPH 2013, and in a follow-up study, we actually studied carefully using different types of learning tasks, whether people did learn better when they were able to, when they had this ability to explore. And it turns out that this intrinsically diverse mode compared to the standard search mode, we had 2 different tasks. The people were search tasks about oil spills and open data. And it turned out that, we had a set of questions and topics, and we had both low-level factual knowledge and then higher-level cognitive knowledge. It turned out that at least for those 2 tasks in the study, the intrinsically diverse mode was a lot more effective than in terms of the percentage of people who experienced knowledge gains. So we share the study protocol. Has extensive coding design with anybody who might want to do a search type study like this. Okay, so that was the intrinsically diverse objective. And following on from that, we then looked at vocabulary learning and how could we apply a similar idea to vocabulary learning. And the general idea is you want to advance somebody's progress towards learning a goal. In this case, it might be to learn a set of new words, but you also want to, in some sense, minimize or reduce the effort that's involved in that goal. So at a high level, you can write it like this. There's a part of the objective that measures how effective, if you want to show somebody a set of documents to learn from, you want those documents to be effective, but then there's an effort associated with them that's a penalty. And so, we want to search for the optimal set of documents, but the set of documents is obviously very large. And so we need to figure out a way to do this efficiently. And so in a 2017 paper at SIG-IR, we looked at vocabulary learning from context, because this turns out to be a very nice framework to do simple kinds of learning experiments. And so we took the idea that you saw for intrinsic diversity and we applied it to vocabulary. So instead of covering different sub-aspects of Kelly Clarkson's career, for example, we applied it to covering a set of important vocabulary that you would need to understand a document. And again, I won't go into all the details here, but the idea is that, you have an expert model that determines what are the important words to learn. You have a student model that captures what words the students already know. And then you have an optimization part that figures out, okay, given what the expert says they should learn and where they are now, what do we have to show them in order for them to reach, to get close to that goal. And so this is an instance where we are taking a typical ranking function, and the thing that we're incorporating here is a very simple super simple cognitive model of how people learn when they are exposed to a vocabulary item in context multiple times over time. So it's sort of a spaced repetition model. And so so we have this problem of, okay, how do we show them the ideal set of documents? And so to solve that, we broke it into two stages. We broke it into a first phase where we figured out, okay, what's the set of words that they would need to be exposed to achieve the overall learning goal. So this is a set of words, SK. I call them, statistics, word counts, essentially. And then given the word counts they're supposed to see, in the second phase, can we find a set of documents that gets close to that overall set of, what are called sufficient statistics for the word counts? So this turns out to be another submodular objective where we can apply a greedy algorithm to sort of find the documents that cover the appropriate set of words. And in order to kind of model how somebody might learn the meaning of a word, how well they might learn the meaning of a word over time, we used a very simple, standard model from item response theory. And, essentially the more you see a term in context, we didn't model the different types of context here. Again, this is a super simple model. We're interested to see how well the simple models did in saving people, effort in learning. So, if you look at the objective now, this is the learning effectiveness part. So given their prior knowledge, and given the fact that they're shown a set of these new SKs, these word counts for the terms they're supposed to learn, you plug that through the logistic function. In this case, we said, okay, every word that they see is a little bit of effort. So we just sum up all the number of words that they've read as a very simple form of effort. You could imagine using something much more complex to model effort, but for now, that was good enough. So again, the goal here is to figure out how many times they need to see each word to get, to learn it sufficiently, given what their prior knowledge is and what the goal is. Yeah, so you can, visualize the trade-offs. If you're reading 5 words, you can sort of look at the trade-offs between the learning you get for each term. We can model the fact that some terms are more difficult to learn than others. And yeah, so that's a fairly simple optimization problem to solve. And so you get this set of SKs, and then you feed this is the set of, how many times they need to see each word. And then in the second phase, you do this solve this greedy covering problem where you find the set of documents that covers what they need to see. So we called the version of the search engine that knew about their prior knowledge, the personalized version. And we looked at a variety of different metrics. And overall, we found that the personalized version, they were able to learn the vocabulary more effectively in less time with this new objective function. So we did a follow-up study to that to explore long-term retention. So the results in this paper had to do with the short-term retention. This had to do with a longer-term post-test and understanding what words they retained. And this is an interesting example of how we saw an interesting effect where the personalized version was a significant difference in retention if we looked at the delayed post-test, the long-term retention for high difficulty keywords. We were able to see a significantly better retention in the personalized version for the high difficulty keywords. And we would not necessarily have seen that effect for those keywords if we had not done the delayed post-test. So I just have a very short third section about adaptive reading technology. I'll take some questions now, I guess. Yeah, so how would you assemble a user-specific knowledge profile to personalize difficulty measures? So this is a very interesting question. It's something that we're working on right now. So the vocabulary learning community in psychology has there are a number of instruments that are used to gauge different aspects of how people know words and understand concepts. We're trying to apply some of those to chemistry classes and chemistry students. So it involves a combination of different kinds of assessments, both sort of more active and more passive. So asking them about whether they're familiar with this term, and if they are, asking them to give a definition of it. One of the things that I worked with Bob on was an automated way to in real time score the nature of somebody's definition to see how well it captured the different aspects of the true definition. So that idea is something we can apply to for personalized difficulty measures, I think.
Kevin, I have a question. This is Dennis.
Yeah.
You're talking about personalizing the search and the analysis based on things that have been returned before and from previous searches. And some of the assumption here, I think, would be that the people actually read the stuff that was actually found, and
right.
And that's not necessarily true.
That's right.
So you obviously have something in there to fudge that too. Yes.
So the definition that we use to decide if somebody read something or not is it's a 30-second dwell time. So in the logs, if somebody clicks on something and spends at least 30 seconds on that something, we assume that they've read it, basically.
Okay. And of course there have been studies that show, that the kind of what you actually see and stuff on the screen starts out very wide at the top of the page, and then it funnels down to just reading the stuff in the left column. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. And that kind of leads into my next part, because we are doing gaze tracking studies that are looking at that as well. But yeah, so no doubt this, some of the work, the online work, especially with search engines, makes certain assumptions about, and I think the thing that is effective though is that we're able to do these studies with such a large population that that some of those effects are mitigated by the fact that we have so much data. But you're right. There are some key assumptions here that need to be understood about how people read and interact. Question about, do you warn the user that the results are ranked by intrinsic diversity instead of conventional relevance? So in the study I mentioned, we did tell them kind of what was going on. We did make it clear that this was a particular type of result page that was attempting to show a diverse set of results. What happens when a document would be highly ranked, or perhaps the highest rank for two of the diverse categories? So I guess in that case, the way that the algorithm worked, it would sort of, I guess, whatever query document pair happened to have the highest aggregate rank. So that optimization problem is a joint optimization. It optimizes both the queries and the documents at the same time. And so it's sort of popping off these pairs greedily. And I guess if it happens that a document was highly ranked for two, if one subquery grabbed it first, then the second subquery would grab the second ranked document. If that makes sense. So, any other questions? This last part is relatively short. So as Dennis mentioned, there's a lot of benefit to be gained from understanding more about how people actually read. And so one line of research that I've been working on with colleagues at Microsoft Research has been gaze-based understanding and support of reading comprehension. And so this was published in our web conference paper of 2020. And the idea is that, so at Microsoft, we developed a classifier that takes the raw gaze signal. And, when we, as you might know, when we read, our eyes don't move in a continuous line. They make these movements called saccades, which are incredibly fast because of the way the eye is engineered. There's a very small part of the eye called the fovea, which can do very high resolution imaging, but it only can see like 1 degree in width. So your eye does this amazing thing where at incredibly high speed it tracks sort of in steps. And so this classifier, it was meant to capture those reading saccades. And we're not obviously aware that we do this, but there are some very predictable patterns that happen when we read. And so with this classifier, we can see different patterns emerge from the saccades. And so, for example, the green indicates normal sort of moving forward through a sentence. But there are some other points in red here, which are called regressions, where our gaze stopped and went back to reread a certain point. And this happens all the time too, that we're not aware of it. And then some yellow ones, so that there are short and long dwell times that we can get from the gaze signal as well. And so the idea is that we wanted to test a few hypotheses with this sort of custom browser that was gaze aware. We wanted to look at, so one idea is that people have looked at in psychology is whether giving people questions while they're reading, active, it's called active reading, giving them questions while they read, make them think about what they read, we wanted to see if that was effective. And we also wanted to do an adaptive experiment where we could tell which parts of the document were skimmed versus which parts were read more carefully. So here's an example where you can see these rectangles are the quick saccades of we obviously couldn't capture necessarily all the saccade events, but it's, it samples them, and you can see that this person is sort of skimming these paragraphs here. But when they get to this paragraph, it's read much more closely. This NNF is called, it's a normalized normalized number of fixations. And so by computing the NNF statistic, you can get an idea for which paragraphs have high number of average fixations or low. So we use these adaptive fixation statistics to decide, in part, what questions to ask people. And so we could generate questions that we would call easier questions based on material that we know they read very closely. So in this case, it's going to be hard to see, but at the bottom here in the interface, there's a part where the question appears. You can click on the button to get a question, and then there's another edit box here. Sorry for here, where you can type an answer, and then you can ask the system to check your answer. So these are all factoid questions. So in this case, it's like, what was the name of this particular mission? Who was the commander, and so forth. So we were also able to generate, what we thought we considered more difficult questions, where somebody skimmed something quickly and maybe didn't absorb it well. Those questions would tend to be more difficult for that particular circumstance. So the bottom line is that it was very interesting. So we had a couple different comparisons, treatment conditions. We had one condition where there were no active questions, and then we had one where there were these adjunct questions to see what effect that had on learning. And then we also had two different sources of questions. We had one source of questions that was human generated. We used this squad question answering data set that was has lots of human curated questions. But we also had an internal service that produced, that took the text and generated using AI questions automatically. So we wanted to get a sense for what the quality of those questions were, and so forth. And so one of the things we saw is that, like most of the significant learning effects from the adjunct questions, we saw in the delayed condition, so the longer term retention. So this is another example where if we did not have a delayed post-test, we would not have seen this effect. And so the idea is that for a certain group of learners who didn't know a lot about the topics that we had given them, we did see that the use of these adjunct questions did lead them to have a better longer term retention of these facts than otherwise. So that's kind of a sampling of some representative projects. I didn't talk about this really interesting work that Bob and I did about in schools with having an adaptive tutor to teach vocabulary. Unfortunately, didn't have time for that. I'm happy to discuss that later if people are interested. But going forward, there's a lot of excitement now around ChatGPT, obviously, and related technologies. And the idea is that, I presented something that used sort of classic web search, but more and more we're seeing that educational interaction can be more and more of a dialogue. There's lots of potential there, especially when you combine reinforcement learning with these large language models. And so that's one area that we're working on, especially, with multimodal questions where you can extract a picture from the lecture slides, ask questions about it, so forth. So there's much more to be done, even in the part of the landscape I described. So we want to, one of the things we're working on is how to optimize question asking policies. So that's an interesting optimization problem in itself. What are the right questions to ask if you have a budget, limited time, or limited cognitive budget per questions? What are the best questions to ask that help learning the most in whatever sense that means? So that's another case where you want these cognition-aware reinforcement learning objectives. And we're looking at something called adaptive structured submodularity as kind of a fancier version of submodularity that can capture the fact that there's a history. You can see what somebody's interacted with before and whether they got things right or wrong. And then this question of, desirable difficulties, which is a classic idea from psychology, from learning science. We want things to be just the right amount of difficulty, not too easy, not too hard. You want people to exert some level of effort. We know that that improves learning in many cases. So how do you do that while keeping people engaged? And how do you encourage things like curiosity through novelty, serendipity, and so forth? So those are all really interesting new types of objectives that we can think about. And then, evaluating personalized learning has always been a challenge. There are different metrics we want to try to get a more complete view of what happens when people learn, not just short-term learning, but other factors, as I mentioned. How do I evaluate the quality of the models that we have about people's knowledge and goals? There are different modalities we're working with at Michigan. We do lab studies. We do less crowdsourcing now. We do mostly lab studies. We do some online studies. One advantage for search experiments is that you can do something called interleaving experiments, where you interleave two different algorithms and their results, and you can actually, that's a very powerful statistical technique that works even with personalized algorithms. So that's one thing that we're doing with personalized video search, for example. So just to leave you with these final points, these themes that we've learned about through the work of my collaborators and I, we've learned about the value of having these, even simpler types of metadata like reading difficulty can really enrich, can create a whole new category of abilities to help support learning. So richer representations of content will continue to be very important. How to let AI algorithms know about human strengths, goals, weaknesses is also going to continue to be, I feel, an important focus of research. How to, assessment of learning, how to understand implicit and explicit assessment of learning is going to continue to be a very difficult but important problem to work on. And then, as I said before, trying to optimize for robust long-term retention is super important, not just short-term learning. So those are the four things I'd like to leave you with. It's been a real pleasure having this opportunity to share the work of my collaborators and I, and thank you again to Bob for the invite. And feel free to reach out with any questions now or later.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So I have a question that I'd like to start with. With ChatGPT and one of the issues that has been raised, that's come up, is people believing what these things are saying. The notion, I'm a child of the 60s. The slogan from that time was "Question authority," and now it seems like everything they don't question. They just believe things. They spread conspiracy theories. It's unbelievable. And I'm wondering about using these type of tools to help students learn to question whether something is really an authority. What is the source, the validity of some of these things? Trying to use ChatGPT in the way that they're saying, having people say, is this believable? Is this something that's real? I read about Facebook having a system called Galactica, which would use generative AI to write scientific papers. And they withdrew it because it generated a paper about the benefits of eating glass. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, just today, I was grading a report where it was pretty clear that they'd used ChatGPT to create certain swaths of the report. And they have a classifier on OpenAI. You can check these things, but you get a sense for the language. I think there are definitely opportunities here to teach. I think it's a great idea, Bob. Like, I think some people are very just adamant that it should never be used in the class and so forth. I'm not quite in that camp, but exactly as you say, this is a great opportunity to teach about credibility, about what it means to verify, to cite. And I think there are plenty of great assignment ideas you could come up with that could take advantage of that, like that idea. So that could be a hugely informative assignment in class. The instances that we were using these large language models in our work, any critical, like for example, one of the things we're doing is we're creating a database of sample questions, but all those questions are always vetted by an instructor. So we're using these tools kind of to save time, but we're not trusting the output in some sense. And we're also, the kinds of things that we're trying to leverage it in ways that these large language models are the things that they're particularly reliable at. The things that they're unreliable at are things like inference, right? But things that they are pretty reasonable at are like summarizing existing information, summarizing it at different levels of difficulty, extracting key concepts. Those are types of tasks where it has less wiggle room to hallucinate, I guess you'd say. But your point is very well taken. I think we're at the start of a revolution. I think things are going to move more quickly than people expect. It has huge implications for a lot of academics, and their research agendas. So yeah, and we're already seeing in the classroom, it's already coming up.
Absolutely. Let's see some of the other questions. What was in the chat? Some in the chat.
Josephine asks, can you say more about synthesis question affected grades? Josephine, can you say a bit more about what you're thinking there?
I had read a line in one of your slides, and I was just quoting it. If you go back a couple slides. That one.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So in addition to the factual questions that we generated, we also generated, so most of the questions were about facts, but we did have the system generate what we call the synthesis question to ask about their understanding of the article. Because we wanted to, while we were testing these adjunct questions, we wanted to see if the synthesis questions would be helpful as well. And we did not find any significant learning effect from asking from the synthesis versus no synthesis question conditions. So thank you for that, for pointing that out. That was an interesting finding, I guess. Any related qualitative research? Most of the research in my lab is mixed methods. We do user studies that both contain interviews we interview users fairly intensively, but we also use heavily instrumented interactive online systems that gather lots of log data. At the moment, my main focus is on applying what we've learned. So a lot of the work I've just described is relatively general topic work, but we've been working very closely. I have a colleague, Yulia Severgina. Dr. Severgina is a is an expert, is a chemistry faculty member and librarian at the University of Michigan, and she and I have been looking at chemistry classes in particular, and how, for example, when students, so there's quite a movement at Michigan, for example, in getting STEM students to do more writing, and that turns out to have some interesting effects. Just short responses to prompts about what's being said in class, but also getting to do more writing by using social annotation. So I don't know if you've heard of a tool called Perusall, but Perusall is a social, what's called a social reading tool, where if I, as the instructor, I have a reading I want the class to read, I can put it into something like Perusall, and Perusall lets you, it turns the document into a social forum where people can discuss and debate, and you can see people's annotations, and it sort of combines a discussion forum with the PDF. And so we're very interested in how, like, what students annotate when in these readings, what they find difficult, what they comment on, and things like that. So so that's very much a situation where we're using a variety of methods, qualitative and quantitative.
Thank you.
Kevin, I was also wondering about the part of your talk where you're talking about the different aspects of search. And did you look at, it reminded me of the things where you see autocompletes, that somebody who typed this would also type this, would also type that. Did you look at the relationship between the aspects there versus the things that people were completing? Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. So it turns out that, when you look at search data, there are several different sources of query, like of data about query variations. One of them is anchor data, anchor text, like what are the different queries, essentially like anchor text, or what are the different queries people use to get to a document with the search engine. But the other one is within a search session, people issue, multiple queries. What are the different query variants that they issue as part of the same session? And Perusall is, it's called Perusall. I'm not sure if I got the spelling right, but that's basically what it is. So yeah, it turns out that in order to do the best in order to get the best quality aspects for our experiments, we had to combine those different sources of query variations, and it was kind of an interesting challenge getting that. We actually got a version of that working at the University of Michigan. Well, we didn't have search logs anymore, but we were able to do something that using Wikipedia and trying to be creative, deriving the aspects from Wikipedia taxonomy and so forth. So, but yeah, no, you're right in that the search case, something like autocompletion or those kinds of query variants was one type of query variation data that was useful, but I think we ended up combining, especially the session data was super helpful in combination with something like that. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you. Yeah, really great to chat.
It's good to see you again.
Likewise. Thank you, Bob.